Hello, welcome to the extra credits of Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. I'm Trey.
And I'm Kelsi.
So we recently discussed Eggers' work on our Hereditary episode, is that right? And we talked about how Ari Aster, Jordan Peele, and Robert Eggers are three kings of horror currently in contemporary horror cinema. And we explored how Robert Eggers might have the most distinctive voice among those three, even though they all have their very specific qualities of what makes them great filmmakers and storytellers. Eggers is someone that I think really understands practical atmospheres, or why they're important still in movies today that are so digital. And he is meticulous in crafting historically accurate, but yet eerie reimaginings of the past. So he makes these like historical
world
epics.
Building.
Incredible world builder. And with Nosferatu, that's no different. This is a very immersive technical feat. It is a craft movie, meaning every part of the technical process of filmmaking is in the forefront. The things that are sacrificed are things in the narrative, which we'll get into today. This is not a movie I love, though it's a movie I respect visually, sonically, cinematically quite a bit. And it has that Eggers signature of being interested about texts that explore supernatural elements, and like, what if those supernatural elements of our history were real? Like, what if a mythos about witches were real? What if a mythos about Greek monsters was real? Or Norse mythology? In this case, it is the history of vampires. So this is somebody who constantly comes back to stories about rejecting modernity, exploring myths and constructs. He's a real history nerd. I think he's a bizarre weirdo if you listen to him in interviews, but he's a little bit like self-aware of those things. So and I'm saying that in a good way. Who obviously loves making great, tangible, real movies. And, one of the reasons that I think I really connect to Robert Eggers' films is because he usually features characters who are sort of unraveling. And my favorite Eggers movie, and one of my favorite satires of the past 10 years, is The Lighthouse, because there's so much absurdity and comic relief in what feels like a horror film. But it really secretly is just a great dark comedy of two guys losing their minds with each other throughout a few nights, or one night. It's kind of confusing throughout that story. And so he's really, and even The Northman recently, I think you could argue, rewatching that film, it's a lot funnier than you might realize your first time watching it. So he's really has built a reputation for making these seemingly very self-serious films that are actually not taking themselves seriously at all, which is one of the reasons that I think Nosferatu is a little bit disappointing as an Eggers fan. Like, not this movie in a vacuum, which we'll get to, but as an Eggers fan, I was kind of surprised.
Definitely. I think, especially since we went in, we love his films. I think you might like them a little bit more than me, but I still really appreciate them for someone who would normally maybe be out on certain like genre films that he's making, like this Viking action, avenging, mother father narrative. He, like you're saying, includes that kind of biting satire, looking at mythology, masculinity, and he does it in The Lighthouse as well. And so to not see that in Nosferatu, which feels like it would be so easy to, especially in the ways that he's telling the story here, it's just underwhelming.
Well, it seems like throughout Nosferatu, and we'll tell listeners and everybody watching at home when we're about to jump into spoilers, so we're still in non-spoiler territory right now. And we saw this movie almost a month ago now, so it has been a minute. And we were lucky enough to get those screeners. But it seems like he was trying to explore Nosferatu. He wanted to be true to a film that inspired him, I think. This feels like a movie that would inspire a Robert Eggers figure, the 1920s film, that is. But it seems like a movie that he was going to try to take in a direction of painting Nosferatu as this like loser predator figure, like this absurd incel serial killer. And there are moments in this film where you're like, is he poking fun
is
at
he
this
doing
guy?
That? Yeah.
Like Bill Skarsgård's Nosferatu making these crazy noises and going around different corners of his mansion, tracking Nicholas Hoult down, or the way he kind of just like goes around different corridors. Like the way that he's exploring this character and the way that he directs Skarsgård is fascinating, because I am waiting for the shoe to drop in as far as when is he going to poke fun at what maybe this character represents to him. Obviously, the text of the inspiration of Nosferatu and before that Bram Stoker's Dracula are about a lot of themes about rejecting modernity, about xenophobia or anti-Semitism, which are kind of unexamined themes in those stories that have now taken on a new light in this past century. I don't think he's looking at that as much in this movie. He's more looking at Nosferatu as a predator figure with and as far as like how his connection is to Lily Rose Depp's character. But that still feels like he's taking that subject very seriously. And so then it lends critics or people like us in the podcaster space to then examine the narrative a little bit more thoroughly. And there's not a lot here textually. Like, it doesn't seem like he's that interested in the storytelling of this movie. It seems like he's much more interested in the atmosphere of the film and immersing an audience into a classic Gothic horror. My only problem, I think, when watching it is that I think he does sacrifice a lot of like subtext or like interesting aspects of these characters that might be compelling that just aren't to me.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
Definitely. And I think, this isn't a spoiler, but we are really like with Lily Rose Depp's character
She's
lot,
the lead
right?
character, yeah.
And that doesn't really ever pay off in the end. And also exploring it through the lens of the Orlok figure being this like looming, right, predator figure. That's not really like totally explored in the end. So yeah, thematically, it's just kind of a letdown, and you almost like expect an Eggers movie to kind of build, right? And so it does feel like it's building, like the tension in the first half, the first third, and then it just ends up kind of going nowhere for me.
Yeah, well, a lot of the horror in this film is not based on spectacle, which is nice to see. It is refreshing. A lot of the horror is in the implication of what Nosferatu might do to Nicholas Holt's character, what he might do to Lily Rose Depp's character, or the community that we're going to see, this Puritan
and that
Victorian
was
era community.
Yeah.
And that was successful, and that was refreshing in this genre that is so focused on like ripping people apart nowadays, in this post-slasher era that we're entering into, or I guess whatever the Terrifier movies are. And so it's nice to see something that is like taking its time, a little bit more like a Jaws, where you don't see the monster until the very end, or an Alien with the xenomorph, where you are treating this villain with a certain amount of caution in terms of how much you want to show them. I think it's a little bit of a disservice to this movie, because I think when we finally see, let's say, Nosferatu in the light in this film, I think we're supposed to sit back and almost scoff a little bit how pathetic he is. Though I don't think that really hits, and I don't think it's actually that successful. And we'll get into that more behind spoilers.
Definitely.
There's also a part of this movie that, and this might just be my own bias, and I'll just say it now just to acknowledge it. I don't really care about like Gothic literature. I don't really care about vampires, especially in particular.
Me neither.
We're the Twilight generation, so I think we've always been around the kind of like liking vampires ironically. Like the Hugh Jackman Van Helsing movie, I thought was sick as an 8-year-old. Now I watch it, I'm like, oh, I see. I thought this was like parody, basically, which it kind of feels camp when you watch it now. And I think it might have it was taken seriously then, but we get to like kind of, I guess, re-examine our relationship to these things now. But I think that Eggers is trying to make Gothic monsters scary again. And I do think that is interesting. I want directors like him who have these unique visions that are going to build immersive worlds like this with these Gothic monsters and the mythos and re-exploring these things. And I hope filmmakers in his lane get to make movies like this. Like I know they're remaking The Mummy and Frankenstein once again. And so I'm interested to see like what we can get out of this reawakening of these traditional horror films. Though I can't believe that an allegory as dense as Dracula or the Nosferatu adaptation is this movie, this reimagination, because there's so many contemporary things that could have done
2024 right?
Yeah,
like
that's what I'm
when
saying,
you have like a Frankenstein story, or you have like a Poor Things is a great example of kind of like a Frankenstein story that
it's a great take. Yeah,
they were able to like incorporate contemporary themes into, and you don't even have to go like really in depth for me. Like I wasn't expecting this like mind-blowing thematic movie within a horror Gothic of Nosferatu with Eggers, right? He is very like kind of surface level but repetitive, funny, and then it builds into like Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe like losing their minds at the lighthouse, right? Like
screaming at each other.
I'm fine with
alcohol.
kind of like repetitive, maybe not in depth but surface level, that it becomes like a message essentially, right? And in this movie, like in 2024, if you're going to remake this really like iconic figure or like a Frankenstein, at least it just felt weird to not do something with it.
Yeah.
And there were moments where they are like looking at maybe different things, right? Like they could be talking about like dogma when there's a plague, and people are like doubting this, right? Or they could be looking at the idea of like hysteria and how Lily Rose Depp's character is treated by the doctors in the movie. But it never does anything really with those things besides maybe giving like a laugh to the audience. So it feels very strange, like almost outside of his films that he usually makes, in that they have something running underneath. And so, yeah, in 2024 to not do something with a really like famous story, it feels very strange to me.
Well, this will be an interesting conversation and episode because I think I'm going to be not contradicting myself, but I'm going to be talking about what really works at a high level a lot in this episode, while what just totally fell flat for me. And almost felt one tone or no tone for me. And the first thing that jumps off the screen in this movie is like how hypnotic it is, like how Jaron Blaschke, the DP, works with the composer, and then in the edit with Eggers, like trying to figure out how to increase the tension, as you're saying, and the dread and the atmospheric texture of it all, while creating this like psychological tension between characters that builds throughout the movie, as well as more mysteries are unraveled. And the performances are incredible across the board. Even though some actors are in different movies, I like the different movies that they're in. Like Dafoe in particular is doing a bit, but he triples down on it, which he's a legend for that. And yeah, so there's a lot of great, I guess, filmmaking going on from every artist on set in this movie. There's exquisite craft in this film. And it's undeniable, like, as a crafts piece. However, like what we keep talking about, and now we're about to jump into spoilers, the narrative, the movie's story feels kind of trapped in world building. It feels so focused in creating something that we just don't see anymore, which is practical atmospheres. And because the film is emphasizing mood and world building, it really is at the expense of like a narrative cohesion, or a completely explored theme. For source material, like we're saying, is so layered. And it's also surprising because Eggers is the guy that made The Northman and The Lighthouse and The Witch, movies that are about gender dynamics across different cultures, across different mythos, that it seems like he's trying to do again, but like you're saying, in a much more superficial way in Nosferatu. To the point where then it becomes kind of questionable why he makes certain decisions that feel kind of like politically outdated in some moments, because you're wondering if you're not going to fully examine this it doesn't need to be like heady, right? Like you're saying. I wasn't looking for a lot, like you're saying.
So complex and nuanced in terms of like what he is exploring with Lily Rose Depp's character. But at least if you're going to approach that, or just like approach something. It just felt like kind of deeply uninteresting as it continued. And then it felt like the pacing then outstayed its welcome. Like you're saying, I think I enjoyed the kind of ability that that they were able to put us in sort of like this trance. That's what it felt like,
I think that was
to
effective.
mirror, right, the Lily Rose Depp character. And also just like other characters in the movie. That was successful. But then it's like, okay, well, if you're not going to say anything, I'm just bored, to be honest. Like, even though it looks great.
That's such a sad word to use, but you're right. I was bored. And again, listeners or people at home, this is a movie that people are really high on. Like critics that we really respect, that we read all the time, think this might be one of the great like horror films of the last 5 years. I just did not have that experience. We've been repeating ourselves already. We're not even in the spoiler section, but I was immersed. I was just like really underwhelmed. I felt kind of flat, and it didn't feel like there was like a lot of payoff for a lot of the immersion that took place for 2+ hours. And it's still, for whatever reason, the movie felt like 3 hours, but it was only 2 hours and like a change, really. And so I was disappointed by the text, but wowed by the craft. And it's hard to like, I don't know, balance those feelings, to be honest. So when we're about to jump into spoilers, I'm sure we'll get some examples
because we're fans of
here.
Eggers, you know?
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess I should also say before we get into spoilers, just like I have seen though, people come for people in like comments of just people not liking this movie. And it's like, you know, I can completely understand maybe disagreeing with our take if you did enjoy this movie. And especially if you're someone who, you know, we don't really love vampires. I don't like monsters in general in my movies. Or maybe if you're someone who really enjoys like gothic horror and you really like to see this just like straight up reimagining of it.
Right.
But like if you're someone who's going in the comments to be like, you didn't get it, here's why this is so great. Besides, I already said it was technically like a huge achievement.
Yeah, but you're talking about the self-serious supernatural.
Yeah, the people who are like,
losers.
Yeah, coming for people, this is an amazing, it's like, I'm just like a little embarrassed for you.
For anybody
just for anyone who's like really coming for anyone in the comments.
We haven't really had that yet, like on Letterboxd or anything.
But I'm just saying, particularly for this movie, it's like
I've seen it.
I got it.
Yeah.
And then I just
a little bit
I personally
Snyder-esque,
yes,
in terms of the way that people hated on the Justice League or Batman films, and like all these commenters that feel like they're not real people, like are commenting in sections about like how those are actual masterpieces.
Yeah,
it does feel like they've elevated to they discovered Robert Eggers. You know what I mean? And that's a little bit unfortunate for a filmmaker as good as he is and a team as good as they are. Okay, spoilers. Spoilers are ahead. So the good stuff. Let's start off with the good stuff because we've been talking a lot about the things that didn't totally work. Like we've been saying, Nosferatu succeeds, I think, visually, sonically, tonally in moments. It's probably a top 5, like, you have to see this in a theater movie this year. Like, it is up there with Dune and Furiosa. I saw the TV Glow, The Substance, Challengers, right? There's only a handful, 6 to 7 movies that you have to say, like, to see this in the biggest screen possible. You should see all the movies you can in theaters, but in the biggest screen possible, this is one of those. If it's playing in an IMAX, which I'm not sure if it is, I'd have to double check that. But if it is, see it. The visual, I think, the stunning language of this movie just demands for you to see it with an audience, and it really, like we've been saying, it immerses you. It loves its decay. It loves its dread. Yeah, you can feel the practical filmmaking. You can feel the heat of the candles. You can feel the tightness of the corsets. You can hear the chewing into animals. Like the sound design and the performances are really working hand in hand. And the panning that's famous to Blaschke at this point that he does is overwhelming. But you have all these screams coming in and the music coming from behind you. In the specific theater we went to, which was like a critic screening, for whatever reason, they turned up the volume. I think they honestly maxed it out because it was so loud. Yeah. I don't know if you noticed that, but there was like it felt like there was screaming coming from behind me in different parts of the movie. Yeah. That was probably the way they did the sound design, the sound engineering of it all. But there's a lot of design elements I just love about this movie. And I thought the first one I wanted to note as a real big positive was they took that shadow from Count Orlok. Is it Orlok? Nosferatu, from the original 1920s German film, and they doubled down on that. And the shadow becomes like this secondary part of this extension of our antagonist. Yeah, you feel really like cool. He is kind of like lurking in the shadows. Yeah. I love the kind of moment where the little girls at the very beginning are talking about a monster being in the room, right? And we feel like there's this menacing presence. If you're not completely familiar with the story, or you're interested to see what Eggers is going to do with it, you're interested in how Lily Rose Depp's character is basically like this presence, right? Is like in her dreams, like invading her mind. Yeah. And so it does, I mean, that the film does successfully, I think, capture that shadow figure that again is like amazing in the trailer, and also probably the best scene in the movie, that shadow hand going over the whole city. Good. It's a great shot. It's so good. Yeah. But just I think like in terms of atmosphere, the way that Eggers is able to capture the shadowy figure of Orlok is great. And also the use of the shadows, like you're saying, practically. Yeah. But what was the thing that you were talking about before? Oh yeah, the sound too. The design, yeah. Yeah, like the moments where the wild worshiper of Orlok. Oh yeah, his ally. Yeah, the real estate agent. Which I still love that he's like a real estate agent. But when he's like funny. Chewing, right? Like rats or people, like those sound effects, you're so right. Like you hear that as if somebody is eating some chicken next to you, like they have a roast next to you. Like it's kind of crazy. So love the design really on every kind of level of filmmaking in this movie. Bill Skarsgård portrayal of Nosferatu, I think, is good. Yeah. I don't have a lot of strong thoughts about Bill Skarsgård as Nosferatu because this is sad for me to say this, even though he is like an iconic horror figure at this point, playing both Pennywise and Nosferatu. Pretty wild. And obviously Eggers loves the Skarsgårds because he cast 2 in a row. Yeah, the brothers. He's got to get the other one next. He gave the other brother a little more to do. Yeah, that's true. But I think you could legitimately replace Skarsgård with somebody else and have never told me who the actor was. I just wouldn't have known. Yeah. Because that's how much they don't the way show they, like, the figure. Shot him, yeah. I feel like they really cast him because he has that powerful voice where he can do something cartoonish but still have stakes. Yeah. Now, whether that works for you, I think in this particular movie is up for debate. I would say I did find moments where I almost wanted to laugh at the voice. And I think that's because I know Eggers' work and I can't tell how much he's poking fun at this idea of saying that there's this like predatory, loser, pathetic incel coming to haunt this community. And he has like this cartoonish voice that sounds like he's from a SpongeBob show. I was also thinking about SpongeBob because of that one episode where Nosferatu is literally in SpongeBob.
Yeah.
Again, our generation just has a different relationship, I think, to like gothic stuff.
Yeah, like we think the Flying Dutchman, you know?
Yeah.
For ghosts.
But does that make sense in terms of like I don't know if Skarsgård actually can get past the prosthetics, past the makeup, past the fact that he's like forced to live in the shadows a lot of the film.
And I thought when they do finally show Orlok that he looked good.
Yeah.
But I think you're right in terms of like the way like the blocking of the shot and just the way that we're introduced to him. One, like you were saying before, in terms of like a Jaws figure, shadowy figure, or kind of xenomorph figure that he was supposed to be. He was shown to us too early. And so it lost the stakes of that kind of shadowy figure. And then because we saw him too early and we continued to see him as this menacing figure or supposedly, menacing figure, it began to lose its stakes. And because of that, because it is kind of like an absurd premise in this gothic horror, then it starts to become, in a 2024 lens, like a little bit comedic.
Yeah.
There's humor to it. And especially if you're coming from seeing Eggers' previous films, then that happened. So that was also a part of like why I wanted to laugh as we continued to see him.
Well, it's tough because the humor is sort of in conflict with the more serious jump scares.
Yeah.
Like when he's on the ship and there's people going to the basement of that ship and you see what happens, right? And he like rips somebody's head off, I think, essentially. And so like you have...
Which was like a different movie.
There was like
almost.
a tonal clash going on because there are different types of films that they're trying to squeeze into this one movie.
Yeah.
And I think it goes back to, for the Eggers heads, like you might know, this is a movie that just inspired his entire career. He watched it at like 8 or 9 years old and he was fascinated by as a silent film, as scary as it was. And if you still watch it to this day, it does hold up as something that is terrifying. But that original 1920s, 1922, I think, something like that, German film, it is kind of funny. It is absurd. Like they're intentionally so. It is finding an absurdity in this figure, and like you see him like kind of he's like on sidewalks walking in the community. He's like stopping at like as people are pedestrians are walking by. He's like loading coffins on top of one another, and you have this far away, almost Wes Anderson shot looking at him. Like there are small things like that this movie didn't totally. I don't think he wanted to fit in there because he didn't want to be making fun of this titular Nosferatu figure that maybe inspired his fascination with the occult or fascination with different mythologies. I think so. Ultimately, I really am a fan of Bill Skarsgård. I just didn't really. The performance wasn't memorable. The figure of Nosferatu was memorable.
Yeah,
like the image of him and the fingers and the nails and all of that stuff. Even though I liked the idea of the implication of horror rather than the spectacle of it. Outside of Orlok, the film really relies and benefits on different great performances, from supporting roles to lead roles. I think I was really surprised by how much I was into the lead performance from Lily Rose Depp, who I thought gave a breakout. I think that's the right word to use, considering she's the daughter of a famous figure, but let's just call it that. A breakout performance as Ellen. She is excellent in this film. And I'm not using that word lightly. I know it's like a cool thing to say about this movie because she has a few loud acting scenes, like all caps acting. Like she has an exorcist moment. She has a moment like she's doing a scene from Pen 15 where she's like speaking in tongues and moving her tongue around physically and then like shaping her face in different ways. There's a couple loud acting moments that I think are incredible in terms of how they're shot and designed, but also the performance. But there's a lot of subtleties in her performance throughout this film that is just really great stuff. And it obviously is a role built for Anya Taylor-Joy. She was probably doing Furiosa, I would assume. I don't know if that's been confirmed. Or maybe Eggers just wanted Lily Rose Depp. But I'm glad he did because Lily Rose Depp, I thought, brought a rawness physically to this role. Whereas Anya Taylor-Joy, when she brings like an anger or some kind of unsettled attitude to her roles, even though I think she is a really good actor, sometimes it feels a little bit performative. I didn't feel a performativity here with Lily Rose Depp. She was really immersed into the role. It was very good.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think the movie would fall apart without her because it really relies on those moments of her basically convincingly just emoting that some presence, right, is like in her mind, or she's seeing someone. Like
That's
those
a
are,
good
I
way to
feel like
put
those
it.
are hard things to do,
Especially when you don't have a totally developed character.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the movie positions her as a product of trauma, whatever happened in her childhood with Nosferatu. At least that's how the movie positions her character's grief in a way. And so she has a lot of like conflicting emotions to deal with. Like her character is going through like this repressed state, while also other people projecting mental illness onto her because of the era. And there's also a level of like her needing to self-actualize, like gaining her agency back, or reclaiming it in a way by at the end of the movie basically sacrificing herself so that Nosferatu dies.
Which I also feel like is maybe it was not totally thought out. Like it just feels like it felt like it was supposed to be kind of the big plot drop. Should I talk about this now, or
sure? Yeah, we can talk about it now.
But it feels like it was supposed to be kind of this big like reveal that she was actually going to like save the city or whatever.
Yeah,
by sacrificing herself, and it was this sort of like selfless moment that she was communicating only to Willem Dafoe and not to Nicholas Hoult, to her husband, because she knew that maybe somehow he wouldn't let her do it. But especially because it wasn't really exploring like things thematically totally with her character. It felt like a really strange choice to make.
She felt like the character was used as a device to create like emotional moments, to create tense moments in the horror, to create like this big reveal that she is going to be the one who kills Nosferatu as a final girl, sort of. But yeah, it just felt like really unexamined, considering what Eggers probably had the capital to do. It doesn't really feel like the studio had a lot of notes on this one. It really feels like he got to make his I don't know, like probably one of the most important movies he's made in his career, maybe even the most important movie to him.
It felt like it was like, like we're going to give her character agency by like giving her a lack of agency at the end. And that was very confusing to me.
I think, yes. Well, I think this is a little bit of the Eggers project, which I think is complicated. And I think it's going to be revealed more as he gets more capital in this field, that he's clearly making movies that are rejecting modernity. Now, what parts of modernity that he wants to reject in his films textually is a fascinating conversation that I'm not prepared to have today. We are going to be doing a Lighthouse episode pretty soon on Patreon, which I'm really excited for. Maybe you and I and James, who's going to come on for that episode, can discuss that. But yeah, I'll be curious to see what he does in future films thematically, because there's a lot of unexamined things going on in this movie. Even though that gives you those it gives you those images of like, and there's like this anti-capitalist image of somebody giving Nicholas Hoult cash in this exchange of money and greed and the corruption of money for his love and romance and his marriage with Lily Rose Depp's character. And that image feels very superficial and doesn't feel examined at all. And to even call it anti-capitalist feels strange, or like a criticism of capitalism. But that's sort of what they're trying to do with this real estate mogul. And then you also have them talking about her corsage and like needing to make it tighter, and corsage
corsage I think is like the flowers on your wrist.
And like over medicating her and all these things. Like the hysteria is not really examined in terms of what it's a product of. It's kind of done in a quick
it's used as like a plot device to have the characters question if she is like to be trusted or not, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not interested in the gender like aspects of that totally,
which is strange, again, considering his past films. Now, the supporting roles, Nicholas Hoult, who is sort of a lead, he has a lead sequence of the movie where he's like the main character for 30 to 40 minutes. He does the classic Nicholas Hoult thing, and this is an actor we like quite a bit. He does this thing where he knows he's good looking. There's a knowingness to his charm. There is a knowingness to how thoughtful he's being, maybe too thoughtful, right? Maybe he's a bit too kind or too sincere, and he's jeopardizing a little bit of his own kind of like identity. So he comes off a little bit dull, like a little bit of a pushover, easily manipulated, right? Like that's kind of how he feels as a character in a lot of his films. And he's really great at balancing those conflicting energies and tones. So I think he's good in this movie.
And also it's fun because he gives the kind of facade of like, I know what's going on the surface. And I don't know how, you're right. Like it's a really funny thing that he balances that we kind of talked about
on Notting Hill.
That, and also they talked about it, Hugh Grant and
That's right. They had a interview
Nicholas Hoult
conversation.
talked about it, where we were basically saying, like, did he kind of do the Hugh Grant playbook from About a Boy? From just basically being in his presence as a child.
Yeah.
And then literally, like, maybe 2 days after we released that pod, Nicholas Hoult told Hugh Grant, I tried to do you.
Yeah.
Like, I tried to do your performance.
Holt was like, sometimes I rewatch my stuff and go, wow, I'm just doing Grant. That's crazy. And he is, and he's, doing it better in some ways, actually.
Yeah. But that comedic, balance that you're talking about is really singular to him.
Yes, I like him in this film. And then you have Aaron Taylor Johnson and Emma Corrin as his friends who watch Ellen while he's away. Corrin is not given a lot to do, is not given a developed character.
Maybe besides, like, finding her kids, like that was,
which is a crazy image when she finds her children,
or when she starts to kind of get sick, like she's given moments there a little bit, and she does well, but for the most part, you're right, like doesn't really get a character to do much with.
Robert Eggers chooses actors, I think, who have extreme faces, and she has one of those extreme Victorian era faces, and so it really works for the part. It's just too bad it's not too developed of a character. Aaron Taylor Johnson is good in this. He's having a really strange 2024. He was a bad guy in The Fall Guy, the Ryan Gosling
but she was great in
project. He's really fantastic in that. He has this new Sony villain movie, Kraven the Hunter, which I won't be seeing in theaters probably, but maybe I'll catch it before we do our ranking episode in February for this past year.
You can tell me about it.
Recently he reportedly passed or lost the James Bond role to Josh O'Connor. I don't know whether to believe that or not.
I don't know how true that is.
It's a big rumor that Josh O'Connor was offered it. There's a great interview on the Challengers press run of Josh O'Connor being asked about James Bond, and he went, "Who, me? Me? James Bond? I think they're mixing me up with somebody else."
Mistake.
Yeah,
he's so cute.
But it's also Josh O'Connor. Like I could see him. I could see them going a different direction with Bond.
Yeah.
Even though I think it was clear in the last movie what they should have done.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll see if all that's true. I'm only bringing that up to say he's had a really up and down year.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is one of my favorite recent performances from Aaron Taylor Johnson. In fact, it might even be one of my favorite performances he's given in his career. I really liked him in Bullet Train a few years ago.
Oh yeah, but in this movie, in this movie
he is actually really fun and actually brings an emotionality to the film when he loses his family. Like there is something outside of what Lily Rose Depp has to do that is at least interesting in his character arc. Even though he leaves the movie pretty quickly and a little bit like strangely, like it looks like he's going to be a big part of the finale of this movie. There's
true,
a moment where they're all in the carriage, like Defoe and him and Lily Rose Depp and Nicholas Hoult, and it almost feels like a team up moment where they're going to go fight Nosferatu and it's going to turn into like a silly film. And I was really excited for that. None of that happens.
No.
Unfortunately. And he goes to die with his family.
I think, you're right though. Like
from disease, I think
you said this earlier, but him and Willem Dafoe really are like in a Robert Eggers movie.
Like what they thought what an Eggers movie would be, an absurdist film. Yeah. Especially Dafoe.
Yeah.
Defoe's basically doing a bit in this. It feels like at one point he's going to be like, I'm something of a vampire hunter myself. Like it feels like he's going to do a Green Goblin, like scientist thing, like mad scientist. And that's what he's doing. He's playing like this old magic, old mythos kind of like mad scientist who hunts mythic figures. In this case, a vampire. Like he's so bizarre, but he's so like compelling and charismatic, and he commands the screen and the presence of really the camera. And he's so strange, but he's like, also one of the moral anchors of the movie. He seems like the only one listening to Lily Rose Depp's character, or at least his character is. And he is, even when he's like shouting and speaking in these like scientific tongues and doing the most, he is kind of the most self-aware character in the movie amongst the chaos. So the audience really needs him. And I think the last time we see him is when he's like dancing around, like burning the coffin of Nosferatu. And there's like all the rats everywhere.
Last time we see him.
You have his shadow in the background.
All the rats were effective. I thought that was good.
Yeah, especially when the boat crashes. Into their community. So in terms of good things outside of the style and the ambiance, like that we've been talking about with the atmosphere and the performances, I think that's really it. I ultimately thought the movie was deeply inspired, but really uninteresting, and just took too much time getting through its story and kind of skating around the central premise as if it was like really mysterious about what was going to be revealed. But we kind of already saw what happened at the beginning of the beginning of the movie is the mystery in terms of the relationship or the spiritual relationship or whatever you want to call it between Nosferatu and Ellen, and him being this predator figure, and assaulting her when she was younger, and her like getting this kind of reckoning and this like this revenge and sacrificing herself, and how complicated that is, what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's just narratively just really boring to me, just a tough word. And just like what we've been saying,
and even like the
paced
performances that were all so good, and even like the ones that kind of grounded the movies and made it like interesting in some ways, or strange in some ways that we normally get from an Eggers movie, it still couldn't save it. Like it ultimately was just like uninteresting. And then to me at the end, not only uninteresting, but it felt like it wasn't fully thought through with the Lily Rose Depp character. Yeah,
again, which is odd because this is the writer of The Lighthouse and The Northman, and it seems like he's positioning Nosferatu to be this joke about reframing vampires as silly, absurd, pathetic, and instead he kind of ends up just ending the movie, and I don't really feel much at all. So I'm excited for whatever his next nightmarish dreamscape is going to be, whatever his next atmospheric film is going to be. I just would hope that he brings somebody else on to the screenplay in this, whatever his next project is. Apparently it's going to be a movie about a medieval knight caught between different power dynamics.
I'm there.
Trying to like win his battles, I guess, which I'm down. Obviously, we're going to be sad for the rest of Robert Eggers' career. And then the movie after that, I guess he has planned as a Western. So like he really is trying to like reimagine a bunch of historical epics. Like I want to see his Ridley Scott Gladiator. Like what does that look like for Robert Eggers?
Which is like usually why I love to go see his really unique tone, right?
Yeah.
Like I love seeing people fight on volcanoes and kind of like what that calls into question.
Two naked guys fighting on top of a volcano over honor.
Yeah.
Like what? That's hilarious. And it's really funny that some people like who love the Northman treat that super seriously. Speaking of the Snyder heads, like the 300 heads, like are like, that's sick. But if you're watching it just with like a second lens of, oh, is this supposed to be shot with absurdity? It's like, yeah. It is for certainly. Extra credits. I'm going to give it to Lily Rose Depp. I was listening to an interview with her today, and she said her major inspiration for her career right now is Sharon Stone from Casino, and I felt seen.
Yeah.
I don't know why I felt seen, but I did. I was like, that's a deep cut for like, for people who like these kind of like complicated heroine figures, like that's a really interesting pull. And when she said that, I was like, I see it. I see the Sharon Stone energy, and I'm really excited for whatever she has next in her career. She seems like somebody who could turn into a Paul Thomas Anderson, Martin Scorsese, future lead of one of their movies. And I would love to see her enter into that space.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, she like, I was going to give my extra credit to her, but I had a feeling maybe you would too. So I have a second one, but I think you're right. Like, and we just talked about Sharon Stone and the ginger character in our episode on Nora. Right. But yeah, so that's really cool to give that character a shout out. And to think about, like, again, maybe what this movie's lacking in terms of, like, what I want to see from, like, a ginger, right, character and how that should be maybe, like, an updated or evolved. Like,
some more autonomy.
Yeah.
Nice,
Yeah, story or, narrative in 2024. But my extra credit goes to the world building. Like, again, even though thematically this movie kind of fell flat, I think the atmosphere was so good. Like the kind of just composition of every scene, from the costumes to the set design, was amazing. We already talked about the performances, so my extra credit goes to the world building here, because I really did feel like all of Eggers' movies that I entered into this very unique setting.
The natural lighting with the candles, like stuff like that. Like,
also,
it's really refreshing to see.
Whoever cut the trailer, I want to give extra credit to you.
Oh, wow.
Because I was so in and so excited to see this movie, especially after the shadow,
the
scene again, going over the city. Like, still great. I still like did the Leo, DiCaprio meme when I saw it in theaters with you.
Kind of gaslit by the trailer a little bit.
Yeah, I was like, where was this movie? So,
well, that was the extra credits of Nosferatu. You can check out our YouTube feed, where we just put out another episode of A Complete Unknown, which is a movie we liked a little bit better than this film, I think.
Yeah.
Big surprise, actually.
Yeah.
And Chalamet is wonderful in that. In fact, Chalamet, Lily Rose Depp, you can go rewatch The King on Netflix if you're into that.
Yeah.
If you like what you heard, like and subscribe
and
to
Robert
our new
Pattinson.
YouTube channel, Pattinson as well. And comment below, what do you think is your favorite Robert Eggers movie, and why?
Yeah.
Mine's The Lighthouse. I think yours is too.
I like The Lighthouse, but
you're not in love with it.
I'm not as high on it as you.
Okay.
But I do think it's probably my favorite of his. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, y'all.
I'll think
Let us
about it
know.
more for the Lighthouse episode.